Want to know what goes on in the mysterious mind of a teenager? Curious about a teen's worldview and thoughts on today's issues? Join Coffee Break with Trail Youth, where teens expose what life is like through their eyes and, well, just really speak their minds. Unedited, of course.
Welcome to Coffee Break with Trail Youth, and I am Kristen Suray. Today I have a special guest speaker who is John Farian, and he's going to share his story about his personal loss and how he has gone on in his life to honor his sister. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So again, this is John Farian. Just a little bit about me, so you kind of know my background is I'm originally from Minnesota. I moved here to Washington State in 2012 for a career move back in the day. But actually, now that I've lived here a while, I know I can share with you that my experience and my background of growing up in the rural areas of Minnesota is not that much different than the community here of North Bend. And so I think that's a great tie-in for the story we're about to tell. So I just want to take you back. So just to give you some perspective, I'm 45 years old today. Live in the community. I have two teenage boys that are 16 and 18 today. My wife and I have been married for 23 years. So we've got a little experience and quite a bit of background that we can look back on and reflect on now. But I want to take you back to a day in 1985. It was May 3rd of 1985. My sister Karen, I was 10 years old. My sister Karen was 15 years old at the time. And trying to keep the story to a brief and to the point, but also get the message across is unfortunately, I came home one evening after school, after a field trip to the local Native American Museum, and picked up my souvenir and had a great day and came home with my little brother. I was one of 6 children in our family, so I was born child number 5 of 6, and my sister being the middle child and the child above me here, 5 years older than me. And she, unfortunately, that evening when my parents came home and discovered that she had taken her life that day. And it's one of those things where in the moment the life immediately got turned upside down, right? So at 10 years old, I lost my sister, I lost my best friend, and there was a lot of questions at that point in time. And some of the things I'll just walk you through is, sitting there at a very young age, listening to my parents who were very much had no experience and were not equipped to deal with this at the time. This was all something that they had never dealt with their experience in families, friends, or otherwise. And, in hindsight, we can look back now over the things that we've seen and we've learned and reflect back on it and kind of help share some of what we've learned over the years with you guys. But the one thing we learned in my sister's situation is, we found out after the fact that my sister had left a note to a friend and mailed it off, that she was sexually molested by an uncle of ours. And, that of course not only changed our immediate family dynamic with my sister gone, but also the much broader family dynamic, and we at that time discovered that not only was my sister impacted, but other cousins as well who were still living. And so the whole family had to manage and deal with all of that. But, again, I look back to, the types of things that I've gone through in my life and how I processed all of this. And I would share with you at, 10 years old, you're only so well equipped in life to process anything. At that age, you definitely, you feel the immediate moment, but you deal with it from a 10-year-old's perspective. And you ultimately come back to it later and think like, did I cope with this? Did I manage this? And, what were my emotions and feelings at the time? And, definitely there was, many, many different days or evenings and, going to sleep at night, asking the question, why? What was this about? Why? Why did she do this? What was it? Is there something, I think as a survivor, you always ask yourself, did I do something wrong? Is there something my parents could have done differently or whatever? And one of the very specific things that I remember my parents, explaining to people the weeks after the event, that my sister took her life, was talking with people and explaining that there were very subtle signs and little hints that my sister had dropped, things, little comments, things like, oh, I'm never going to have children, right? It's something that at face value, if you take it, sometimes those are just things that people say, right? Or like,
Right.
oh, like, and if you do some research on this, you'll find that those are things, people talking about, what the future may look like, and they're giving you little hints sometimes of what's there if they're considering, suicide. And, from a very broad perspective, I would share with you, I'm sure Kristen, there's questions that you're gonna ask me here to get me through it, but my assessment is that if somebody has either attempted or committed suicide or whatever, we have the idea. That's okay. The idea that from my point of view or from your point of view, as you're listening to this and you're hearing this, is I can't comprehend what that person's going through. Why would they do this? And what I would share with you is the way I've kind of coped with this and dealt with this is coming to the understanding, through professional counseling and help and whatnot, is just knowing that, somebody who is in that position is very likely, if not certainly, going through some form of depression or some form of mental illness that maybe has not even been diagnosed or aware, right? Mm-hmm. And so, to be sad is one thing, but to be sad to a point where you feel like making a very permanent decision for a temporary problem, which is ultimately what it comes down to, that isn't what you would consider a normal thought process, right? And, as somebody who, frankly, has never been a depressive person, I've been sad, I've been angry, I've been all these things in my life, but I look back of, like, have I ever considered, taking my own life? And, I would say the answer is no. And so it's impossible for me to comprehend, what somebody who has done this has gone through, whether it be help or whatever. But they just, they get to a point where they feel like, my experience has been, and just in conversations through my life, is that people feel like they're a burden. And I think if you interview somebody who's attempted or that you've heard afterwards, it's like, in so many cases, they feel like they are the problem. Like if they go away, that everybody's problems around them get solved. And, as we all know, that's the furthest thing from the truth. It, only drives and creates new problems and new things to deal with folks. And
so in talking to somebody, they brought out the point that from the person that's in the depression, suicide to them is a very selfless act, mm-hmm. because they are the burden. They're removing that burden of responsibility away. But from the survivor, it's more of a selfish act.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much, people look at suicide as a selfish act. It's like, they're removing themselves from the burden, but they're not realizing the chaos and devastation that they're leaving behind and the loved ones. And, frankly, I don't think that I can tell you, there's no way they have considered fully the ramifications of their actions and, what it means for them to not be here tomorrow and the chain reaction of what that means to people around them.
So I know you were 10 years old. Can you remember what it was like for your parents to go through in just the short time afterwards and the years following? How did that change the family dynamic?
Yeah, and it's, I'll attempt a little humor in this like dark subject, but I would tell you that being the next child in line of parents who've lost a child to suicide was no cakewalk. You now have parents who are questioning everything, right? Mm-hmm. And as they should. And, their response, unfortunately, was very reactive instead of proactive. I think their attempt was for it to be proactive with myself and my little brother. But the reality is, based on what happened with my sister, it was a very reactive situation where, because of what happened to my sister, my rules and, where they kept an eye on me and what I was allowed to do or not to do and how I reacted and interacted with them, all of these things were probably subtly very much a byproduct of what happened with my sister. And I probably personally didn't make life any easier on my parents, right? It's like I was probably kind of a quiet, generally I was not a troublemaker, but, I was not a great communicator either, right? And mm-hmm. whether that was a direct byproduct of what happened with my sister or not, I couldn't tell you. Maybe it was, and I think this is something that I'll say out loud, and, whether it be me in my own situation or with my sister, is even in hindsight, my parents, this is my memory of it is, chalking up what my sister was saying and doing and going through at those times is just kind of quote unquote typical teenage behavior, right? I think there's so many things that in life, whether you be a parent or an adult in the world and you're like, oh, they're just being teenagers, right? And what I'll tell you is that, we are all just individuals, and it doesn't matter what our age is, right? It's like we're just being us, and frankly, if we're it really comes down to just educating ourselves and talking about it openly, right? Is the more I've heard and the more I've listened and the more I've learned, the more I've been prepared to raise my own children, right? And to put them in great positions, which, I'd love to at one point in the interview here to chat a little bit about some of the things that my wife and I have done to, raise our family.
So the years following after, how did it shape your life? How did you, I don't know if the word cope is the right word, but how did you keep moving forward in life?
Yeah, and, coping and how do you manage and all those things are interesting perspectives, and I don't know that you'll ever get the same answer from anybody, frankly. For me, memories of my sister are frequent and often. Sometimes it's a very brief thought or memory, or I see something that'll remind me of her, or an anniversary of her death, or some family. We were talking before we started recording here, is things like family holidays, right? And those times when you sit and reflect back and think of like, man, how old would my sister be now, and would she have children, and what would her life be like? And so there's these points in your life that you go through, and I would tell you that every point of my life has been unique and different. And I think in looking back on it, I don't know that I fully did grasp and cope and deal with it along the way. And I struggle with the word cope, and I know you can kind of feel that vibe. It's because
right.
I don't know that to me it's the whole thought process of how do you react versus respond, right? Is kind of my way. I would tell you how coping in general with life, and it doesn't matter if it's in a professional work environment or in my personal life or whatever, but one thing I've come to grips with in my life, probably a lot because of this incident, is that there's only so much in our lives we have control over, right? Mm-hmm. And we can get angry, we can get mad, we can be happy, we can do whatever we want to. And if we treat those responses as, it's a reaction to what it is, and we start putting the burden and the blame on those things and everybody around us, we're no longer in control, right? As an individual, I'm no longer in control. If what my sister did made me angry, or if what I'm doing and feeling, or what my parents did to me afterwards as a teenager, if those things, then I'm just reacting, right? And I'm letting other people control my life. And it's taken me a long time to get to this point in my life, but it's like, how do I respond, right? And so how do I cope and how do I manage is by being here today, right? That's part of it, is keeping my sister's name and her story, and my loss and the loss of her life. If this story makes a small difference to somebody out there, and literally believe that if you can help one person just hear something that puts them in a mindset that gives them a different perspective on life and gives them an ability to kind of respond in a new and different way. I find through community service, there's so many different things we do, whether it be through our church, through the community that I've called my friends. It's like, if someone needs help moving, that kind of thing, it's like at a drop of a hat, you're there for your friends, and you just make sure you're there for them, right? And you put yourself in a position where you're available to those around you, because you never know when tomorrow's not going to be here, whether it be mine tomorrow with a car accident, or somebody else's tomorrow because of suicide or whatever. But you live life to the fullest every day, and you just try to make a difference every day.
So what kind of emotions did you experience? Did you ever experience anger? What would be the normal emotion that someone might be able to expect if they lose someone?
Yeah, no, I think it's very easy as a survivor to feel angry, whether it be at yourself or at that person, or whatever, wherever you direct it. But I think there's something I'll just say out loud is there is no normal emotion, right? I think everybody owns their own individual emotions, and all of those emotions are okay. That's an important detail, because for me to sit here and to tell you that you should feel angry and mad and all of this, like, frankly, you might just be like, oh wow, that's crazy, how did that happen? And you might not have a lot of emotional attachment in the moment of whatever just happened. That's not traditional, right? But don't beat yourself up over feeling that way either, right? Because we all manage and process and deal with things in different ways. And I think ultimately what you do is you just recognize for yourself how it is that you're processing it, and just acknowledge it, right? And then just take it day by day and move forward. But yes, feeling angry and, upset and, all of those things are very natural and normal emotions. And sometimes feeling guilty for being happy. Like, there's a lot of that.
Right.
Yes.
I
mean, frankly, a lot of people would look at me and say, like, oh my God, this guy's got it made, right? Like,
right.
I'm married 23 years. I've got 2 incredible children. I've got a successful career. I've made something of myself in my life. And there's a moment where I stop and I think, like, why do I deserve?
Right.
You do.
Why do
why do I deserve this?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, that can be a challenge in itself, right? Is, just sometimes feeling guilty.
It's a normal thing.
Yeah.
It's a normal thing to feel guilty about that.
But your own happiness, feeling guilty for your own happiness, right? And thanks for giving me a minute. So, but feeling guilty for being happy is one of those things that sometimes you can struggle with, right? And so, redirecting my energy into and onto others and being here today to, to share this message is part of how I cope, how I move forward, and how I try to make a difference.
I think your sister would be proud of you for that. So you wanted to share some ideas, with parents of what you've been doing with your kids, especially now that they are at the same age that your sister was. Mm-hmm. What's some of those advice? Yeah, no, that's a great point. Is my 2 boys are now almost, they got birthdays coming up very quickly, so they're almost 16 and almost 18, so just shy of that right now. But they have now both, lived longer than my sister did, at that point in their life. And so we've gone through some very important milestones in our lives, and I can look back and reflect on what appears, at least at this point, to be a happy, healthy 2 young men that are enjoying life and, doing well. And I would tell you that it's a very intentional thing of the way we've raised our children is, knowing in hindsight with my sister that anything and everything can happen to us, and sometimes it's just flat out of our control. We can't always manage and control things. But what my personal opinion on the way I feel as a society, sometimes we can tend to overreact, even without things getting to the level that they did with my sister, is that, as parents, I think sometimes we can be overly protective of our children, and we can prevent them from being exposed to the wrong movies or the wrong language or the wrong friends and all of those things. And the approach that my wife and I have taken, and it's to me, it's a lifelong journey, but it can start any time, right? It could start tomorrow. If you're not already there, this is something that you could take and run with and start tomorrow, but just don't expect immediate results. But you can start tomorrow. Is instead of trying to protect your children or your friends from things that you think might be harmful to them, is instead just acknowledge that life is life and anything and everything can come at you, and how can I prepare my children for those things that could come, right? And I think of, things like grade school and, dealing with things like Cub Scouts and just, sex education classes or whatever it is that comes up in school. And we've just always had very open, honest dialogue with our children about things, things that boys go through, things that girls go through. My wife and I have been able to give perspective to our boys of like, hey, when you're going through a date, and this is what the girl's thinking, this is what's going on in a girl's mind, this is what maybe sometimes boys go through and what they're going through. But just preparing them for the what ifs in life and what could happen. And sometimes you have to broach subjects proactively with your children instead of waiting for them to come back to you and say, hey, Dad, so I heard this in school today. What does this mean? Like, literally, we just take every moment as an opportunity to be able to learn from it, right? The positive things that happen in our life, the negative things that happen in our life. It's like, okay, well, let's talk about this, and how did that make you feel, and, what did we do about it? And here's some ideas of how you could respond. But there's one little tip that we, started doing somewhere in grade school, and it was something that we evolved into. It started out as like, hey, let's just talk about our day. Like, oh, what was the best and the worst part of your day? And it's evolved now into, what is the best part of your day? And to this day, every evening when we get together and sit down for dinner, assuming somebody's not at work, my oldest one now is working, so sometimes he's not at the dinner table, but, when we can get together most of the week, we all ask ourselves this question to each other, and everybody kind of responds as, what was the best part of your day? And what that does, and what it has done over the period of time, is it is literally that single question
has evolved our family into the thought process of being aware of the positive things that are impacting us each day, right? Because guess what? There's bad things that happen every day, and there's good things that happen every day, and things that are just kind of like, no big deal, right? But if we can wire ourselves by knowing that at the end of the day we're going to be held accountable to this question of what was the best part of my day, like I'm sure at the end of the day you were able to go home and share with your family the best part of my day was this one kid that I met today, and we told a story, and oh my gosh, we made such a difference in their life today, right? That's the best part of my day. Like I'm sure that's a very common thing for you. And for me, sometimes it's a coworker, right? I was able to talk to a coworker, and something that happened. Maybe it was a recognition I got, or a attaboy type of thing from a boss. But just focusing our lives and our energy around those positive things that happen, while at the same time acknowledging and dealing with the negative things that come up. Because sometimes the best part of our day is the meal that we're having with our family, right? Like
Exactly.
I'd say 10% of the time that's the answer that one of us has, right? It's like, kind of had a bad day,
Right.
but right now this is the best part of my day, and I love the fact that we're sitting here all together.
And I like the transparency,
Yeah.
because we do that with our kids too. We are vulnerable with them, and we're transparent with them, and so they've watched us over the years being that way and being very honest with them. So if we're having a bad day, they know exactly why we're having a bad day.
Yeah.
And because of that, we have now seen them come to us with their problems, with their issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so a very open conversation, and I just feel that it has started, with just open transparency from the parents.
Yeah.
with the
Well,
kids.
it's allowing the
Yeah.
kids, as parents, speaking for ourselves here, is, as parents, when your child comes to you and asks you for advice on something that that their peers probably wouldn't be doing with their parents,
Yeah.
you ring the bell for yourself and say like
Exactly.
success. Like just recently, my oldest son, he was real quickly. I'll try to keep this quick, is he was in the process where he's a senior in high school, but he's running start, right? He is wanting to do cross country running, and he's also started a job, right? And he's at that point in his life where he's trying to juggle his schedule and his plans, and he's failing at it, frankly,
Yeah.
on and off, depending on the moment. And by talking him through it and parenting him through it and basically having dialogue through it, giving him the tools to make the proper decision, but ultimately letting him know that the decision is his to make, and that we'll support whatever decisions he makes. But not only is he able to make the decision and own it, but he's also has to then learn that he has to own the repercussions, right?
Yes,
And that was,
yeah.
I think, those opening moments of like, yeah, you could quit track, or you could quit your job, or you could quit going running start and go back to high school. Like, there's all these things you could do, but each one of those things have repercussions, right?
Right.
And preparing them and giving them the information and the what the tools they need to do, but ultimately then helping guide them in their decision making. But when you find yourself repeating yourself and having to kind of coach them, there's a moment where I realize, like, okay, the decision is now yours to make. I have done all the parenting I can do today, and ultimately your decision will be the right decision. You just have to live with the decision and the repercussions of it, and you're equipped to do so now.
So as we wrap up, one last question.
Mm-hmm.
What would one last word of advice be to the survivors?
Is just be open and communicate about it, right? It's, if you're ever in a moment that you feel like what happened or what somebody attempted to do or whatever it is some dirty, dark family secret, I'll just tell you you're wrong, right? We will learn, something my father told me when at a very, very young age, and wasn't intended for this discussion, but I think it's relevant to this discussion, which is you can learn something from everybody. Sometimes you learn what to do, sometimes you learn what not to do. But bottom line is, if you're paying attention in life and you're having open discussions about it, you're able to learn from everything, right? And, sometimes, I would tell you that I've become the person that I have become today. And frankly, I give myself credit for having this, what I call a spidey sense or a sixth sense around being able to read people. Like when I'm in a professional environment or in a family environment, like I can look across the dinner table and tell if my kids or my wife are having a bad day or not, because I'm tied into things like body language and, just what they're saying and whether they're being open or not. And, no different, would be a school environment for the students, in a professional work environment, it's no different. It's just paying attention to these subtle details. And, people say much more than with their words. And if we're in tune to that and paying attention to it, and I would tell you that that's a sense and a spidey sense I've gotten from this experience I've gone through in life is, hearing my parents say, like, oh man, there was little tips and signs that my sister was giving us that nobody picked up on, right? And that just stuck in my head so hard, and has got me to the point today where, like, I leverage that and I use that as a strength. And what I would tell you is that, and I've talked to many people about this point too, is that the things in our lives that we consider the things that are pushing us down or challenging us or quote unquote our handicap or whatever they are, if you address those things and you focus on those things and you get through those things, they will become your superpower.
That's right. Yeah.
Like, honestly, like I think of what I've gone through with my sister, and I look back to now my ability to be able to engage and interact with people and to make a positive difference in other people's lives. That has become my superpower because of the devastation I went through, right, in my own family, in my own life. And it's no different, it doesn't matter if you're missing an arm. Like, I have friends literally who, they're missing an arm, right? But they've overcome that. They figured out how to get through those things and how they get through their life. And it's now become their superpower. It's kind of almost what they're known for. And everybody looks up to them as like, holy smokes, that person can do that, and they only have one arm. Like, again, it's responding in a positive way and knowing that you can overcome anything with support.
I like that word, overcome.
Yeah, and it's like,
that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, John, for joining us and sharing your story. I like that word, overcome. And I just want you to know, I'm going to pass this affirmation on to you, that you are an overcomer. So if you have just recently lost someone, or if you've been through this before, just remember that. You are an overcomer. You can keep on going, and just keep on sharing the story and keep healing in that process. Well, join us next time for another podcast, and pretty soon you'll be hearing from the kids. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Coffee Break. This podcast has been brought to you by Trail Youth. Check us out at www.trailyouth.com.